There is the tremendous fact of death. I'm quoting him. There is the tremendous fact of death. Everything dies. All our progress, our wealth, our achievement, our knowledge, all goes to death. Cities crumble. Cities are overtaken by forests. In India, we have a saying, 1,000 years a city, 1,000 years a forest. Same place. He says, mountains crumble to dust. Planets are blown away and into dust, and they become parts of the atmospheres of other planets. These are his actual words. And today we know tremendous explosions of supernova and entire solar systems wiped out. Death. The poet Rabindranath Tagore says, a leaf, dry leaf, falls from the tree into a pond, setting off ripples. These ripples spread out into the universe among the stars and galaxies. Change and death everywhere. Vivekananda says, saints die and sinners die. Kings die and paupers die. The learned die and the ignorant die. All must die. And yet there is this tremendous clinging to life. We know it is certain that we will die. And yet the most powerful is clinging to life. And this is Māyā, he says. And this is Māyā. I was reading Ernst Becker's The Denial of Death. It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning book, a very dark book. There, he says, his basic thesis is that this tremendous fact of death is the prime motivating factor. The fear of death is the prime motivating factor for humanity. This fact of death is there, and we say, no, I'm not afraid of death. I don't think about it. He says, you don't think about it. Remember, he's a psychoanalyst, Freudian. Repression. You have suppressed it. So, in Freudian psychoanalysis, and this is New York, at one time it was in fashion. Everybody, like, say, my guru is my therapist. So everybody had a therapist. The pricier, the more well-placed you are. If you say you have a problem, yes, there's a solution. If you say you don't have a problem, I'm all right, I have a more serious problem, repression. You suppressed it. Somebody asked Freud, actually they asked, what is normal? Because whatever you say, you're abnormal. There's something wrong with you. And Freud gave a beautiful definition of normality. He said, the ability to do your work and to love. So if you're functional in your life, more or less, you can just take care of your business, your life. And you can relate to others normally. Then you're normal. A very beautiful definition, actually. So, in that book, he says, this tremendous fear of death is there. It haunts us, but we repress it. And in Freudian psychoanalysis, you cannot repress anything forever. It comes out. So it comes out, he says, in the form of what he calls immortality projects. All the great endeavors of human life, from raising a family, to making a business, to conquering an empire, all of that is our struggle to conquer death. I know I will die, and my reaction is this. I suppress it, and my reaction is this. Whether it's children, or a big organization, or an empire, or art, writing a book, becoming famous, I will live on. But they are all doomed to failure. Because the kind of immortality we want, this is not that kind of immortality. Or nationalism. I will die for my country and I will be immortal as the person who died for his country. But this is not really in our hearts. This is not what we want. What do we want? We want to live like this. Not in that kind of immortality. Woody Allen, somebody asked him, you want to become immortal on the silver screen? You want to live forever in your movies and your books? And he said, typical Woody Allen, he said, no, I want to live forever in my apartment. That is true. We really, that kind of immortality, we all try to get it, but that's a poor substitute for what we secretly want. We want to exist. This clinging to life, this is Māyā, he says, Swami Vivekananda. Then This tremendous contradiction in knowledge. We feel that we can know, and we are knowing more and more and more. But as we go forward, we run into paradoxes. We run into eternal time, is his words. We run into immeasurable space and the endless walls of causation. Time, space, and causation seems to hem us in, bind us, set a limit to our knowledge. I was reading Kurt Gödel. There's a biography written by Rebecca Goldstein. She's a professor here in Barnard College. So in the introduction, she says, the great discoveries in physics of the 20th century, look at the names. Einstein's theory of relativity, Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty, Gödel's theorem of incompleteness. Look at the names. So when she writes that, it struck me suddenly. Relativity, uncertainty, incompleteness. These are the very words used by the ancient philosophers to describe Māyā. And these are the final, almost, discoveries of physics in the 20th century. John Barrows wrote a book called Impossibility, where he shows in every field, as the field advances far enough, as it advances, you get the feeling we'll know everything. But as it advances far enough, deep enough, you end up with certain insoluble contradictions, paradoxes. The limits to knowledge. By the way, it's interesting. In the first week of April, here in New York, in the New School, there's going to be a workshop, 2-day workshop. And guess what the title is? Unknowability. Each session, unknowability in life, in social sciences, unknowability in physics, unknowability in mathematics. John Barrows is speaking. Rebecca Goldstein is speaking also. And it's open to the public in the New School. 4th and 5th April. Unknowability, the limits to knowledge. I was in the Shivananda Yoga Ashram in Bahamas a couple of weeks ago, not for a cruise, for giving talks. And there was this mathematician from Oxford who was going to give talks afterwards, Marcus du Sautoy. And the subject of his talk was on science. The subject was what we cannot know. So the limits to knowledge, Vivekananda says, we feel we should be able to know, but very soon we come up against the more we know, the more we see we do not know. And this is Māyā, the limits to knowledge. Our senses drag us outwards to see, to hear, to smell, to experience this world, to taste this world. And sense pleasure promises enjoyment and satisfaction and happiness and gives us some satisfaction too, but always unfulfilled. Always unfulfilled. The more we try, the more our hunger and our barrenness increases. Somerset Maugham, very beautiful, he says, that quote, the more single-mindedly you chase pleasure, the more you find nothing pleasing anymore. The limits to the, Vivekananda says, we are drawn, yet we are drawn, again and again, like moths to the fire. And we keep, after knowing this also, we keep repeating those behaviors, those learned patterns of behavior. His words, until crippled, we are swept away by death. And this is Māyā, the limits of sense pleasures. With every breath we feel we are free. We have freedom. I'm acting of my own will. And yet when I investigate, when I try to act in life, do something in life, I run up against barriers. I see that there are limits to my free will. The more I investigate, this is one perpetual favorite for philosophers in the East and the West, throughout the world, throughout history, is their free will. Because we feel there is free will. And yet science seems to say, determinism, that there cannot be free will. Religion says, all is God's will, not yours. Philosophical investigation, even neuroscience investigations, the Libet experiments and all. So many kinds of ideas have been generated, all of which seem to show that we do not have free will. This every breath we feel we are free, and the universe telling us again and again we are not free at all. And this is Māyā. Swami Vivekananda says, this is Māyā. Then he says, happiness, our pursuit of happiness, the more we change social reforms, feudalism, unhappiness, we change it into communism, into capitalism, into socialism. Becker, the denial of death, he calls them our bloody utopias. As we try to get happiness from this world and make great changes in this world, we seem to redistribute misery, that's all. Swami Vivekananda says, like rheumatism, you chase it from here, it goes there. You're just redistributing misery. And this is Māyā. He says, as we increase the power of enjoyment, we are increasing the power of suffering too. He says in geometric progression, little bit of increase in the power of enjoyment, multiple times increase in the power of suffering. He says, who can enjoy food like a dog eating? But the dog suffers also tremendously. He says the primitive man in the cave Stone Age society, could take a cut on the hand and it would heal him very soon. He would be very hardy, but crude. Will be completely unable to enjoy the products of our Broadway and the Museum Mile. No, makes no difference to that person. But he says the modern man, cultured and refined, has power of enjoyment and aesthetic sensibilities multiplied manyfold, but a pinprick can kill him. And I was thinking, in our modern context, there's a lot of psychological studies going on. The new generation of children coming up, protected, nurtured to be super kids, no exposure to dirt, vulnerability to infections. The number of studies are showing multiple kinds of allergies are coming up. Why? Where did these allergies come from? They're coming because they were not exposed to nature, no contact with. But not just physical vulnerability, emotional vulnerability. All the time saying, you're great, you're the greatest. If you got it right, you're the greatest. If you got it wrong, you're still pretty great. And shielded from failure, shielded from criticism, shielded from any kind of humiliation, nothing. The hard knocks of life shielded by parents. The result is, when these children come out into society, a little bit of criticism, a little bit of failure, automatic. It's bound to happen. A little suffering, physical, and they fall apart. They become outraged and indignant. And why is this happening to me? It's like a little child who's never been scolded. The first time the child is scolded, it throws a tantrum. How can you do this to me? It's like, but suffering is often necessary for growth. Like I don't know if the example is appropriate. There's one, I heard this several years ago. The Japanese are fond of a particular sea fish, which is very tasty. So they decided that they're going to cultivate it in enclosed fishery lagoons, so that they can cultivate much more, instead of going out to sea and trying to catch those ones. Have a whole crop of them. So they cultivated, and they got a bountiful crop of those, yield of that particular kind of fish. But there was no taste anymore in those fishes. They're bigger, but more of them, but no taste. They thought, what is wrong? Why aren't they tasty? And then they discovered in the sea that those fish are chased by sharks. And when they chase, they fear they produce a particular kind of hormone or something which gives taste. So what they did was, as a solution, they introduced a baby shark to that lagoon. And so that baby shark can't eat too many. So if they eat it up, there's no use. But it's enough to scare the fish. And so the fish go round and round, and the little shark chases them around, and the fish become tasty. Now, this development, and we have heard the story of how if you try to help a cocoon, and by opening it up and letting it, the butterfly can't fly, because that exercise, we have heard the stories, I don't know how true it is, but it is true that the more you increase the power of enjoyment, the more refined, the more protected, the more vulnerable, the more weak, the more prone to suffering. And this is Māyā, Swami Vivekananda says. He speaks about he says, a mother loves her child, no end, dotes upon the child. It is her whole life. The child is her whole life. And the child, perhaps son, grows up to be a brute and abuses the mother and is a source of misery to her. And yet she cannot give up the child. And society perhaps praises her for it and criticizes the child for being ungrateful. And yet the mother knows it is not really love. It is something that she cannot shake off. It's a kind of obsession, kind of a weakness. And she would perhaps be better off shaking that thing off. And yet she cannot. And this is Māyā. It's from Vivekananda directly. The drama of life. We come into this life not a blank slate. Vivekananda says it, like the poet said, we come trailing clouds of glory, but he says some of us come trailing clouds of black smoke too. So some scars, past life, we have had many past lives. And we live in this life. In youth, it is all golden, full of hope and possibilities. As we grow older, we become older and more disappointed and bitter. Maybe wiser, but bitter. And then finally, death comes and sweeps us away from the stage of life. We see in a stage of life, we were kids there. One monk, Dutch, in our order, he is from the Netherlands. So when his parents were about to pass away or to die, he went back to Netherlands to see them for one last time. And he said, later on he came and told me, they were in an assisted living facility, but he went to their family house. And he said, how interesting. The same house where I and my brothers and sisters, we grew up. We played there in that garden. We lived in those rooms. Other children are playing there. Other children are living in those rooms. Other dads and mums are living there. The stage is the same. The actors are different. We are gone. Death sweeps us away. And Vivekananda adds poignantly, victorious or defeated, we do not know. And this is Māyā. Krishna and Narada, they are walking together, and Narada says to Krishna, same question, oh Krishna, can you tell me what is Māyā? Krishna says, ask me something else. And Narada says, no, I want to know this. Krishna says, all right, you asked for it, but before that, I'm very thirsty, could you go and get me a little water to drink? Narada says, immediately I'll do that, please wait here. And he walks to the nearby village, to the well there, and he sees this girl drawing water there. When he comes near the young lady, he's captivated by her beauty, and he says, could you give me a pot of water, a jar of water? And she says, certainly, sir. And then he starts talking with her, and they become friendly, and he's so enamored of her. She brings him home and introduces him to her father, and they like him so much, and he likes them, and he falls in love with this girl, and he proposes marriage. The father accepts him and gives him the family business, and he settles down there, and they're very happy. They have their first child as years go by, the second child and the third child, and years later, one day at night, and he's a busy householder now with a lot of responsibilities, a flood comes, a flash flood. No alert those days, mobile phone. And the water is rising. In terror, Narada gets up and grabs hold of the baby child and the other child and the more grown teenage child, the first child and his wife, 3 kids, and a bundle of the possessions, and somehow staggers out into the rising flood waters. Before he can do anything, the baby is swept away from his shoulders, and the other child is swept away from his arm. Finally, his eldest child and his beloved wife, they're all swept away, and he's thrown on the shore, weeping and lamenting, and he loses consciousness. And he wakes up slowly, and he sees Krishna standing and looking at him. He says, Narada, wherever have you been? It's nearly half an hour I've been waiting. 12 years of his life have passed, and it's been half an hour only. And this is Māyā, Vivekananda says. Sri Ramakrishna, he gives the example of a monk in Dakshineshwar. He says, there's a wonderful monk who came to the temple garden of Dakshineshwar, and he would stay in his little room And he would never come out. He would never mix with anybody. He would never talk with anybody. He spent the whole day in meditation and prayer. One day, the Bengal monsoon, dark clouds come and covers everything. The whole sky is covered, and the temple and the river and the city, they all become dark and gloomy. And then a strong wind came and blew the dark clouds away, and the blue shining sky again. And this monk, he for the first time came out of his room, and he laughed out loud and he started dancing. And then Sri Ramakrishna goes to him and asks him, "You did not come out all these days. Now what is it that you have seen that you are laughing and dancing?" And then the sadhu said in his Hindi he said it in Hindi. He said, "Ye samsar ka Māyā aisa hi hai." The Māyā of samsara is just like that. Blue shining sky, everything is all right. Suddenly dark clouds come. And it's all dark and gloomy and terrible. And then wind comes and blows it away, and it's all back and shining again. This is the Māyā of samsara. Swami Vivekananda gives his approach to Māyā. He says, our very being, our life, our very being is this contradiction. These contradictions he showed, a series of paradoxes and contradictions, and this is Māyā. He says our very being in this is this. Māyā is not a theory, is not an explanation of the world. These are Vivekananda's words, very important. Because so far, the non-dualists have been struggling to provide an explanation because they've been asked for an explanation. Māyā is not an explanation, not a theory to explain the world. Then what is it? He says Māyā is simply a statement of fact. It's simply a description of the sheer contradictoriness, the sheer paradoxical nature of life. Just a simple description. That is Māyā. He says the common folk in India, they say all is Māyā, sab Māyā hai. And he says that I think that's as wonderful a statement as you're going to get about the state of things in this world. All this is indeed Māyā. Now, there are two powerful objections to this approach. One is, Vivekananda himself brings it up. One is, why are you saying that all this is Māyā and this you should transcend this? This is paradoxical, contradictory. There is a school of philosophical thought, very powerful. Vivekananda himself says, in Germany, certain philosophers have proposed, he meant Hegel. He actually meant Hegel. That if you look at Hegel's philosophy, he says, literally, it sounds so Vedantic. He says, the absolute, the spirit, is manifesting itself in this universe through lower to higher and higher manifestations till it will become the absolute perfect being. So we are going from primitive manifestations to better manifestations. Things are becoming better and better and better. It's a progressive development. Hegel's whole idea of dialectics comes from that. And it's a very powerful idea. And it influenced the course of Western thought. From Hegel to Marx is a direct line. Marx just removed the spirit aspect of it, took the dialectics and material dialecticism and Marxism and all of that. So very powerful development of Western thought comes from Hegel. And Hegel's, he says, when you read his logic, the very first line, how pure being or the spirit manifests itself as non-being. And from being and non-being, this dialectical process comes this universe, comes change. And like that, the Hegelian dialectic. Now, Vivekananda strongly opposes this. Vivekananda's objection is this. Any kind of expression is limitation. Right? To actually, what is expression? Name and form, time, space, and causation. A thing. No matter how beautiful a thing, no matter how advanced something, it's still a thing. It is one thing and not the other thing. If it is an expression in time, space, and causation, it's a finite thing. The infinite can express itself only in finite things. So any kind of expression, no matter how wonderful, will still be finite. The infinite cannot be expressed as the infinite. This is the deep, fundamental flaw in Hegelian thought. That ultimately it will become the absolute. No, it will become an imitation of the absolute. So then what is the answer? Vivekananda says, the answer the ancient Vedantins found was not in the flow of Maya, but against the current. That the infinite is expressing itself and experiencing itself in all these ways, and finally realizes that true peace is not to be found here. True fulfillment is not to be found here. Completion is not to be found here. Infinity is not to be found here. And then begins the movement inwards. Vivekananda says two words, pravritti and nivritti. Pravritti means circling outwards, wider and wider circles into the universe. Nivritti means circling inwards. And he says true spirituality begins with this inward movement. He says renunciation, therefore, is the basis of spirituality. Peace is not to be found in a thing out there. Peace is not to be found in the object. It is to be found in the subject. So the source, movement back to the source, to Brahman, that is spirituality. That is Vedanta. Another objection, the second great objection comes, he says, which is more common here in the world today. So very few are Hegelians. But many people are what might be called, Vivekananda, he says, the second objection, agnostics. We really don't know all this. Absolute expressing itself, maybe, maybe not, who knows. All we know is this life and try to make the best of this life. Vivekananda says this position has a great flaw. The flaw is this. It says take life minus the ideal component. The moment we have life, moment we are here, all of us, we seek to transcend it. We want more. We want something transcending this world. We want God, nirvana, moksha, transcendence, fulfillment. The moment we have something, we seek to overflow. Life overflows it. So this ideal component, which has been there from immemorial times, from the primitive societies up to modern times, in all our religion, our spirituality, our idealism, agnosticism seems to say that just take the material aspect of life, just the commonplace aspect of life, and leave out all of that. That's a very limited point. It might satisfy you. It will not satisfy the next person. Why? Religion, art, spirituality, scientific quest, all of them seek to go beyond what we already have. How can you say that this much only is life? So agnosticism has this great, great defect. It takes a very limited snapshot of life and leaves out the rest. It cannot fulfill your heart. You will go beyond it. What is beyond it? The quest for freedom. Quest for freedom beyond Maya. It has always been there. Something within us says, not this, neti, neti. There is something higher than this. Freedom. Vivekananda says that in the most primitive of religions, when you have all these deities, the god of thunder, the god of sun, or the rain, we have these ideas, these gods. Who are these gods? They are personified ideas of our freedom. I cannot do these things. I am subject to death, disease, and hunger. Here is a God who is free of these things. Beautiful, perfect, immortal. The polytheistic religions began that way, with multiple manifestations of our conception of freedom, freedom from Maya. As religion advanced, we came to the idea of one ultimate reality, beyond Maya. This ultimate reality, beyond Maya, beyond time, space, and causation, who creates this entire universe? This is the God of the monotheistic religions. That one God, the great insight that the religions in the Middle East had, the Abrahamic religions, that there is one God, that one ultimate reality rules over this entire universe, beyond this universe. And there the monotheistic religion stopped. Whether it's the Jehovah of the Jews, or the Father in heaven, or Allah, or the theistic religions in India with Vishnu, or the Divine Mother, or Shiva. But Vedanta begins there. Vivekananda said, that's the beginning of Vedanta. That is in fact dualistic Vedanta. Vedanta goes further. Further, That God who is beyond time, space, and causation is also within time, space, and causation as the immanent reality of this entire universe. Everywhere in this universe is that one reality, within all beings, in and through all these existences. An immanent God, transcendent and immanent God. Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, all this is indeed that divinity. Spinoza's God, the great philosopher, 17th century, Spinoza. Einstein here. By the way, I mentioned Rebecca Goldstein. She's one of the leading authorities on Spinoza. So she, in her book, in a talk, she mentioned Einstein. In fact, Einstein said, here in Princeton, he was here, he said, the only God I believe in is Spinoza's God. The God who reveals himself through the orderly workings of the universe, as this universe, not the God who concerns himself with the doings of mortal man. And then he wrote a poem. Einstein wrote a poem, it's available. If you see Einstein's poem on Spinoza, full of, he says, this holy man, he says, to an admiration of Spinoza. Spinoza's God, a pantheistic, I'd say a little bit of injustice to Spinoza to call him pantheistic. Panentheistic would be a more precise word. But anyway, God as this entire universe, as appearing as this universe. And yet, this is not non-dualism. All this is Brahman. If you literally take it that way, it is Vishishtadvaita, qualified monism. Spinoza's God is this entire universe is God, or a part of God. The entire insentient universe and us sentient beings, we are parts of the divine. So this is Spinoza's conception. Like our body, hands and feet and head, all parts of one integral entity called my body. Similarly, we are all parts of one divine reality. Goes further. When you say all this is Brahman, it can be interpreted as Vishishtadvaita. But when you say all this is not, Brahman alone is, then you come to Advaita. Mary Hale wrote in a poem to Vivekananda, I have understood what you have taught, that all you are saying, you are teaching everything is God. And Vivekananda said, I have never taught such strange doctrine, that all is God. Mary Hale protested. She said, you said it. You said those very words, that all is God. He said, no, what I meant is, all is not, God only is. Brahman only is the only reality. That which was outside time, space, and causation as the God of religion, which becomes the Vishishtadvaita, the one divine unity of this universe, Spinoza's God. In Advaita, the final development, it is none other than you yourself. You, the individual being, you appear as subject and object, as a sentient being, as the insentient universe, as the one and the many. Advaita comes to this grand conclusion. Vivekananda says, human thought reaches there such heights that the human lung can scarce breathe there. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. When I truly realize, I am that which I was looking for outside. Tattvamasi, that thou art. This is the reality that was hidden by Māyā all along. What was hidden by Māyā? You were hidden by Māyā. Māyā did not hide the truth from you. You are the truth. So the play of Māyā was your own play. And finally you see, now you stand in the bright sunshine, sunlight, beyond darkness forever, and look back upon the same world. The same world is now transformed from a hellhole, from a struggle and strife and darkness and death and unhappiness into an immortal reality. And all this becomes, you are the stage upon which the drama of life is being staged. You transcend sorrow, you transcend misery, transcend death. Trinvantu vishve amritasya putraha. Listen, ye children of immortal bliss. Aye dhamani divyani tastu. Even ye that dwell in higher heavens. For this is the truth that even you do not know. The gods do not know this truth. Vedaham purusham mahantam. I have realized that infinite being. Aditya varnam tamasah parastat. Blazing forth like the sun forever beyond the darkness of sorrow and death and limitation. Tameva viditva, by realizing that alone, ati mrityumeti, one goes beyond death and suffering. Nanyaf pantha vidyate ayanaya. There is no other path. All other paths lead to Maya. There is only this path. How do you realize that? That ultimate being? You realize that as the God of religion, devotion, as the God of Spinoza, that reality all around, and finally, as I myself, Aham Brahmasmi. That these insights may shine forth in our hearts in this very life, and may we be blessed by the glimpse of light beyond Maya. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.